Montana Territory, 1878. The bitter wind cut across the plains like a knife as Randall Carter drove the last fence post into the frozen ground. At 25 years old, he had already learned the hardest lesson the frontier could teach. Connection meant loss, and loss meant unbearable pain. 3 years ago, raiders had burned his family's homestead in Kansas, leaving him the only survivor. His parents, his younger brother, even the neighbors who had tried to help, all gone in a single night of violence and screaming that still haunted his dreams. He had rebuilt his life here in Montana Territory with the singular understanding that survival meant isolation. No attachments, no friendships that could turn into funerals, no love that could be ripped away by the brutal randomness of frontier death. The land stretched endless and empty around his small ranch, and that was exactly how Randall wanted it. He told himself he was protecting what remained of his heart, keeping the walls high so nothing else could get in and destroy him from the inside out. His cattle ranch sat 15 miles from the nearest town of Copper Ridge, far enough that he could go weeks without seeing another soul. He preferred it that way. Randall was lean and strong from the constant work, his face weathered despite his youth, his jaw clean-shaven and sharp. Women in town sometimes looked at him with interest beneath their bonnets, but he never looked back. The frontier was no place for love, only survival. That was the truth he had carved into his heart like a brand. On that particular November morning, as frost covered everything in sight and his breath formed clouds in the air, Randall mounted his bay gelding and headed toward the northern pasture to check the herd. The cattle needed to be driven closer to the ranch before the heavy snows came. It was routine work, the kind that kept his hands busy and his mind mercifully empty. He was halfway to the pasture when he saw the wagon. It sat tilted at an odd angle in a ravine about 100 yards from the trail, one wheel completely shattered. A team of horses stood in their traces, heads down against the wind. Randall's first instinct was to turn away. Not his problem. Getting involved with strangers only led to complications, and complications led to the kind of caring he had sworn off forever. But then he heard the voice. "I can do this. I am capable of handling this situation." It was a woman's voice, high and frustrated, coming from behind the wagon. Against every bit of sense he possessed, Randall turned his horse toward the ravine. What he saw when he reached the top of the slope made him stop completely. The woman was enormous. She stood at least 7 feet tall, maybe more, her frame proportioned like any other woman but simply scaled up impossibly. She wore a simple brown traveling dress that had clearly been specially made, and her blonde hair, the color of summer wheat, was coming loose from its pins as she struggled to lift the broken wagon wheel. Her face was striking, beautiful even in her obvious distress, with strong features and determined blue eyes. She looked no more than 22 or 23 years old. As Randall watched in stunned silence, she positioned herself under the wagon bed and tried to lift it enough to slide the wheel back on. The wagon rose several inches, an impossible feat of strength, but the wheel kept slipping sideways. "Damnation," she shouted, letting the wagon drop. Randall found his voice. "Ma'am, you need help." She spun around, and even from his position on horseback above the ravine, she nearly met his eye level. Her face flushed red, whether from exertion or embarrassment he could not tell. "I can manage," she said stiffly. "Thank you for your concern, but I do not require assistance." "That wheel's broken clean through," Randall said, dismounting and leading his horse down the slope. "You are not going to repair it out here, no matter how much you can lift." Her jaw tightened. "I have managed difficult situations before without a man's help." "I am sure you have." Randall approached cautiously, struck by the sheer impossibility of her height. He was 6 feet tall himself, and she towered over him by at least a foot. But that does not mean you need to refuse help when it is offered. She studied him with those sharp blue eyes, clearly weighing whether to trust him. Finally, her shoulders sagged slightly. "The wheel broke about an hour ago. I have been trying to fix it, but you are correct that it is beyond repair. I was heading to Copper Ridge to catch the stage, but I suppose I will have to walk now and leave the wagon." "That is 15 miles in freezing weather," Randall said. "You would not make it before dark, and the temperature will drop below zero tonight." He examined the wagon, his practiced eye taking in the damage. "Where were you coming from?" "My father's farm about 30 miles southeast." She hesitated. "He died 2 weeks ago. I was the only family he had left, and I was his only family. I sold what I could and was heading to catch the stage to Denver, where I have a cousin. Randall heard the loneliness in her words, recognized it because it matched his own. I am sorry for your loss. Thank you, she wrapped her arms around herself against the wind. I should introduce myself, Victoria Norton. Randall Carter, my ranch is about 3 miles south of here. The words came out before he could stop them. I have a wagon and tools. I could hitch my horse to yours, get this wagon back to my ranch and repair the wheel properly. Then I could drive you into town tomorrow. Victoria's eyes widened. That is very kind, but I could not impose. You will freeze to death if you try to walk, Randall said bluntly. The frontier does not care about pride. I have a spare room. You will be safe. She studied him for a long moment, and Randall realized she must have faced this calculation many times, trust a stranger or face danger alone. Finally, she nodded. Thank you, Mr. Carter. I accept your offer. As Randall worked to secure the horses and prepare the wagon for the journey back to his ranch, he tried to ignore the warning bells in his mind. He was letting someone into his space, his carefully constructed isolation. It was only for one night, he told himself. Tomorrow she would be gone, and everything would return to normal. But as Victoria climbed into the wagon bed with surprising grace despite her size, and as they began the slow journey back to his ranch, Randall felt something he had not experienced in 3 years. Curiosity about another person. Who was she? How did she come to be so impossibly tall? What had her life been like, living so different from everyone else? He pushed the questions away. It did not matter. By tomorrow night, she would be on a stage to Denver, and he would never see her again. The ranch house appeared through the swirling snow as afternoon faded toward evening. It was a modest structure, 4 rooms and a loft, but solid and well-built. Randall had put his grief into every nail and board, creating something that would withstand the harsh Montana winters. Victoria had to duck considerably to enter through the front door. I apologize, she said quietly. I am used to adjusting for doorways. No need to apologize. Randall lit the lamps as the darkness gathered outside. Make yourself comfortable. I will get a fire going and see about some food. As he worked to build up the fire in the stone hearth, he was acutely aware of Victoria's presence in his space. She stood near the window, her height making his normal-sized furniture look almost like doll pieces. When she finally sat in one of his wooden chairs, it creaked under her weight but held. How long have you lived here? She asked. 3 years. Built it myself. Randall busied himself with preparing coffee and pulling out bread and preserved meat from his stores. It is not much, but it keeps the wind out. It is lovely. A real home. There was such wistfulness in her voice that Randall glanced up from his work. Your father's place was not a home. Victoria was quiet for a moment. My father loved me, but he also struggled with what I am. I started growing when I was 12 years old and simply never stopped. By the time I was 16, I was already 6.5 feet tall. We had to special order all my clothes from a dressmaker in Billings who did costumes for traveling shows. People in town stared, children pointed. Some folks thought I was cursed or unnatural. Randall set the coffee on to boil. That must have been difficult. My father protected me as much as he could, but after my mother died 5 years ago, he became more withdrawn. We lived very isolated, much like you do here. He taught me to be self-sufficient because he knew the world would not be kind to someone like me. She looked down at her hands, which were proportionate to her size, nearly twice the size of normal hands. I learned to be strong because I had to be. I learned not to need anyone because no one wanted to be needed by the giant woman. The words hit Randall harder than he expected. She had built the same walls he had, but for different reasons. Where he had chosen isolation to protect himself from loss, she had been pushed into it by a world that saw her as strange and frightening. People fear what they do not understand, he said quietly. Do you, Victoria asked, meeting his eyes directly, fear me? Randall considered the question honestly. No, you are just a woman who happens to be very tall. I have seen much more frightening things on the frontier than someone who is different. Something in Victoria's expression softened, and for a moment the walls came down. Thank you for that. Most people cannot see past the height. They ate in companionable silence as the fire warmed the small house and the snow began to fall more heavily outside. Randall found himself telling her about the ranch, about the challenges of maintaining it alone, about his plans to expand the herd in the spring. Victoria told him about life on her father's farm, about teaching herself to read from the few books they owned, about her dreams of maybe finding a place in Denver where she could work and build a new life. "What kind of work?" Randall asked. "I am very strong," Victoria said with a slight smile. "Obviously, I can lift things most men cannot. I thought perhaps I could find work in a warehouse or helping with construction. Something where my size would be useful rather than strange." "That is practical thinking." "I have learned to be practical." Victoria stared into her coffee cup. "Romance and friendship are not practical options for someone like me. Men are intimidated or repulsed. Women see me as unnatural, so I focus on what I can control, my strength, my ability to work, my self-sufficiency." Randall heard his own philosophy reflected in her words. The frontier is no place for love, only survival. It struck him how sad that sounded coming from someone else, how lonely and small that way of living actually was. But he said nothing. It was not his place to challenge her beliefs when he held the same ones. "The spare room is through that door," he said instead, pointing. "It has a regular bed, but I can lay out some blankets on the floor if that would be more comfortable given your height." "The floor would be better, thank you." "I am used to it." Victoria stood, her head nearly brushing the ceiling beams. "Thank you again, Mr. Carter, for your help and your hospitality. Most people would not have stopped." "Most people are fools," Randall said. "The frontier does not care about your height or your differences. Cold is cold and danger is danger. Seems foolish not to help someone when you can." Victoria smiled, and it transformed her face from merely striking to genuinely beautiful. "You are a good man, Randall Carter. I hope the world has not made you forget that." She disappeared into the spare room, and Randall sat alone by the fire, unsettled in ways he could not name. He had thought his isolation was strength, but Victoria's presence had shown him how much it was simply loneliness dressed up as purpose. For 3 years he had convinced himself that keeping people out was the same as keeping himself safe, but what was he keeping safe exactly? An empty house, long silent evenings with no voice but his own. He pushed the thoughts away and went to check on the horses before bed. The snow was falling thick now, already accumulating several inches. By morning, the roads would be difficult. He might not be able to get Victoria to town for another day or two. The thought should have bothered him. Instead, as he lay in his own bed that night, listening to the wind howl outside and knowing another person slept under his roof, Randall felt something he had not experienced in years. A sense of home that went beyond just shelter from the cold. Morning came with 3 feet of fresh snow and more still falling. Randall stood on his porch, drinking coffee and watching the world disappear into white. The roads to town would be completely impassable. They were snowed in, possibly for several days until either the storm broke or he could shovel a path wide enough for the wagon. He heard the door open behind him and Victoria's soft gasp. "Oh no, this is terrible." "Nothing to do but wait it out," Randall said. "I have plenty of food stores and firewood. We will not freeze or starve, but I am afraid you are stuck here for a few more days." Victoria wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, looking miserable. "I am so sorry. You did not sign up to have a houseguest for days." "Not your fault the snow came." Randall sipped his coffee. "Besides, I could use the help with some of the work around here if you are willing. Might as well make yourself useful while you wait." She brightened slightly. "I would like that." "What needs doing?" Over the next 3 days, as the snow continued to fall and then finally cleared, Randall discovered just how capable Victoria Norton truly was. She helped him bring hay to the cattle in the near pastures, carrying loads that would have taken Randall 2 or 3 trips. She repaired the damaged section of barn roof that he had been putting off, her height making it easy to reach without a ladder. She even helped him move a heavy piece of equipment that had been sitting uselessly in the barn because he could not manage it alone. But more than her strength, Randall found himself drawn to her company. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked. Victoria told him stories about growing up different, about learning to laugh at herself before others could laugh at her, about the loneliness of being the only person like herself she had ever known. "Do you think there are others?" she asked on the 3rd night. "Other people who grew too tall?" "I would imagine so," Randall said. "The world is a big place. Probably somewhere there is a whole community of people your height, and you would be the one who fit right in. Victoria laughed, but there was sadness in it. That is a nice thought, but I doubt it. I think I am probably a mistake, something that went wrong, one of those strange accidents that nature sometimes produces. You are not a mistake. The words came out more forcefully than Randall intended. You are just different. Different is not the same as wrong. That is kind of you to say. It is not kindness, it is truth. Randall set down his coffee cup. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you really going to Denver? Is it just to find work, or are you running from something? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Both, I suppose. After my father died, I realized how isolated I had become. Years of living away from people, of avoiding towns and gatherings because of the stares and whispers. I thought if I went somewhere bigger, a city, maybe I could disappear into the crowd. Maybe I would just be one more strange thing in a place full of strange things. She looked at him. But honestly, I am terrified. At least here in Montana, I knew the land and the people, even if they did not know what to make of me. In Denver, I will be completely alone in a way I have never been before. Randall understood that fear. He had run from Kansas to Montana for similar reasons, trying to outrun the memories and pain. But the frontier had taught him that you could not outrun yourself. The isolation followed wherever you went. What about you? Victoria asked. You said you built this place 3 years ago, but you have never said what brought you to Montana. Randall hesitated. He had not spoken about that night to anyone, had locked it away as tightly as he locked away his capacity for connection. But something about the firelight and the snow outside and Victoria's honest face made the words come. He told her everything. The raiders in the night, the flames, the screams. The way he had been out hunting and came back to find his entire world turned to ash and death. The guilt of survival, the weight of being the only one left. After that, I could not stay, he said, his voice rough. Everything reminded me of what I had lost. So I came here and built this place and told myself that if I never cared about anyone again, I would never have to feel that kind of pain again. Victoria reached across the small space between their chairs and placed her hand over his. Her hand was enormous, engulfing his completely, but the gesture was impossibly gentle. I am so sorry, Randall. That is a terrible burden to carry alone. We all carry our burdens, he said. Yours is just more visible than most. They sat in silence, hands still touching, and something shifted between them. The walls they had both built so carefully began to crack, not breaking completely but letting small shafts of light through. Possibilities neither of them had considered began to take shape in the quiet. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the sun reflecting off snow so white it hurt to look at directly. The roads would be passable now. Randall could take Victoria to town, put her on the stage to Denver, and return to his isolated life. He should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt a growing dread. I suppose this is it, Victoria said as they hitched up the wagon. You will finally be rid of your unexpected house guest. You have been a good house guest, Randall said. Better than good, helpful, good company. Victoria smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. I have enjoyed my time here. You have a good home, Randall. I hope you find someone to share it with someday. I do not plan on sharing it with anyone. That is a shame. You should not be alone. Neither should you, Randall said before he could stop himself. Going to Denver, being alone in a big city, that is no kind of life for anyone. What other choice do I have? Victoria's voice was quiet. Stay here and be the giant woman everyone whispers about. I tried that for years. At least in Denver I might find work. They rode in silence toward town, the wagon wheels crunching through the packed snow. With every mile, Randall felt something pulling tighter in his chest. It was the same feeling he had experienced 3 years ago as he left Kansas. The sensation of walking away from something important, something he could not name but could not bear to lose. He was halfway to town when he realized what it was. He was falling in love with Victoria Norton. The realization hit him like a physical blow. In 4 days, she had managed to slip through every defense he had carefully constructed. She had shown him that his isolation was not protection but prison, that his belief that the frontier was no place for love was nothing but fear dressed up as wisdom. But what could he do? She was heading to Denver to start a new life. He had a ranch to run, And more than that, what did he have to offer her? A man so broken by loss that he had sworn off human connection entirely. A small ranch in the middle of nowhere, a life of isolation that she was actively trying to escape. They reached Copper Ridge just before noon. The town was small, maybe 300 people, with a main street lined with shops and businesses. The stage office sat near the center, and Randall pulled the wagon up in front. "What time does the stage leave?" he asked. 2 o'clock. Victoria climbed down from the wagon, drawing immediate stares from passers-by. She was used to it, Randall could tell, but it still made his jaw tighten with anger on her behalf. He helped her carry her few bags into the stage office, where the clerk gaped openly at her height. "1 ticket to Denver," Victoria said calmly, ignoring the stare. As the clerk processed her ticket, Randall stood by the door, his mind racing. He should say goodbye, wish her well, and leave. That was the sensible thing, the safe thing. But since when had love been sensible or safe? "Victoria," he said as she turned to leave the office. "Wait." She stopped, those blue eyes finding his. "Yes." "Do not go." The words hung in the cold air between them. "What?" Victoria said softly. Randall took a breath, feeling like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. "Do not go to Denver. Stay here. Stay with me." "Randall, I know I have no right to ask. I know we have only known each other 4 days. But those 4 days have shown me something I thought I would never see again, what it feels like to have someone to come home to. Someone to work alongside, someone to talk to in the evenings, someone who makes the empty spaces feel full again." The words tumbled out faster now. "You said you were going to Denver because you had no other choice, but that is not true. You have another choice. You could stay here with me." Victoria's eyes were wide, her face a mixture of hope and fear. "You do not know what you are asking. People in this town already stare. If I stayed, if we were together, they would talk. They would say terrible things. Let them talk, I do not care what people say. But what kind of life would that be for you, the man who chose the giant woman?" "It would be a life with someone I care about," Randall said. "That is more than I have had in 3 years, more than I thought I would ever have again. You have known me 4 days. You cannot possibly care about me after 4 days. Why not? How long does it take to recognize that someone sees you for who you really are, that they do not care about your height or your differences or what anyone else thinks? How long does it take to realize that being alone is not the same as being safe, and that maybe, just maybe, taking a risk on someone is worth it?" Randall moved closer to her. "I am terrified, Victoria. I lost everyone I loved once, and the thought of caring about someone again is terrifying. But the thought of letting you get on that stage and never seeing you again is worse." Tears had started to form in Victoria's eyes. "I am scared too. I have never had anyone look at me the way you do, like I am just a person instead of something strange and frightening. I do not know how to be what you need. I do not need you to be anything except yourself. That is what I am asking you to be, yourself with me, building a life together." Randall took her hand, both of his needed to hold one of hers. "I know it is fast, I know it is crazy. But the frontier does not give us the luxury of slow courtship and long engagements. Life out here is hard and short and uncertain. When you find something good, you hold on to it." Victoria looked at their joined hands, then back at his face. "What exactly are you asking me, Randall Carter?" "I am asking you to stay. Come back to the ranch with me, give us a chance to see what this could be, and if it does not work, I will bring you back to town myself and pay for your stage ticket, but give us a chance." He paused. "Give me a chance to be brave enough to love someone again." The silence stretched between them, and Randall felt his heart hammering against his ribs. He had put everything on the line, had dismantled all his carefully constructed walls in a matter of minutes. If she said no, he would survive. He had survived worse, but something in him would close off forever, and he knew it. Finally, Victoria spoke. "Yes. Yes. Yes, I will stay. I will give us a chance." A tear ran down her cheek, and she smiled through it. "I am terrified and excited, and I cannot quite believe I am doing this, but yes, I will stay with you." Randall felt something unlock in his chest, something that had been frozen for 3 years suddenly thawing and flooding him with warmth. He pulled her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." They left the stage office together, and if people stared at the tall woman and the cowboy holding hands, neither of them noticed or cared. They climbed into the wagon and headed back toward the ranch, toward the home that would now be theirs together. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Randall's life. Victoria settled into the ranch as if she had always been meant to be there. She took over the heavy lifting work, freeing Randall to focus on managing the herd and planning for spring. Together, they repaired fences, reinforced the barn, and prepared for winter. But more than the work, they built something neither of them had ever really had: a partnership. In the evenings, they cooked together in the small kitchen, Victoria having to duck under the beams but moving with practiced grace. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Randall taught her about cattle management and reading weather signs. Victoria taught him about patience and laughter and how to see beauty in differences rather than fear. The physical affection grew naturally between them. It started with held hands and gentle touches, then graduated to stolen kisses by the fire. Victoria was hesitant at first, years of rejection having taught her that her body was too big, too strange for romantic touch. But Randall was patient, showing her through word and deed that he found her beautiful exactly as she was. 2 months after Victoria had stayed, on a clear January night with stars brilliant overhead, Randall asked her to marry him. They were standing on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cold, watching the moon rise over the snow-covered mountains. "Marry me," Randall said simply. Victoria turned to him, her eyes reflecting starlight. "Yes, but are you certain? Once we are married, there is no hiding our relationship. Everyone will know." "Good, I want everyone to know. I want you to be my wife, Victoria Norton. I want to build a life with you, have a family with you, grow old with you. I want every single thing I thought I would never want again, and I want it with you." They were married a week later by the Justice of the Peace in Copper Ridge. The ceremony was simple, attended only by the clerk and his wife as witnesses. When Randall kissed his new bride, she had to lean down considerably, but neither of them cared. They were married, bound together by law and love and the brave decision to choose connection over fear. But marriage brought new challenges neither of them had fully anticipated. The stares in town grew worse once people knew Victoria was staying. Women whispered behind their hands. Men made crude jokes. The general store owner served them but made his disapproval clear through thin-lipped silence. One afternoon in March, Randall came back from buying supplies to find Victoria sitting on the porch, her face red from crying. "What happened?" he asked, fear spiking through him. "Nothing, I am fine." "You are not fine, tell me what happened." Victoria wiped at her eyes angrily. "I went with you into town today, and while you were loading the wagon, I heard 2 women talking. They said you must have been desperate or drunk to marry someone like me. They said I probably trapped you somehow, that no man would choose this willingly. They said," her voice broke. "They said our children would be monsters." Rage flooded through Randall, hot and immediate. "Who said that?" "It does not matter." "It matters to me. No one talks about my wife that way." "Randall, please. It will only make things worse if you confront them. I am used to it." "Well, I am not used to it, and I will not accept it." Randall knelt in front of where she sat, taking both her hands. "You are my wife. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, and anyone who cannot see how extraordinary you are does not deserve a moment of our time or thought." "But what if they are right? What if we have children and they inherit my condition? What if they grow too tall like me and face the same cruelty? Then we will love them and protect them and teach them that being different is not the same as being wrong, just like your father taught you. And they will have 2 parents who would move heaven and earth to keep them safe." Randall cupped her face gently. "I am not afraid of the future, Victoria. I am only afraid of facing it without you." Victoria pulled him into a fierce embrace, and they held each other on the porch as the sun set and the first stars appeared. It was a moment of pure connection, 2 people choosing each other against a world that said they should not. But the challenges continued. In June, they went to town for Sunday service and found themselves subtly excluded. No one would sit near them in the pews. When the sermon ended, people left quickly rather than engage in their usual socializing. The Reverend, a thin man named Pastor Holbrook, approached them as they were leaving. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, might I have a word?" They followed him back into the empty church. "I want to be delicate about this," the pastor said, his face uncomfortable. "But several members of the congregation have expressed concern about your presence here." Concern, Randall's voice was cold. Your wife's condition is unsettling to some of the families. They worry it might be contagious or some form of divine punishment. That is ridiculous, Victoria said quietly. I was born this way. It is not a disease or a curse. I am not saying I agree with their concerns, Pastor Holbrook said quickly, but I have to consider the comfort of the larger congregation. Perhaps it would be best if you worshipped at home for a time, until people have adjusted to your situation. You are asking us not to come to church because my wife is tall. Randall could barely control his anger. I am asking you to consider the greater good of the community. The community can go to hell, Randall said, standing. Come on, Victoria, we are leaving. They walked out of the church into the bright summer sun, and Randall felt Victoria trembling beside him. I am sorry, she whispered. This is all because of me. No, this is because people are small-minded and cruel. That is not your fault. Randall stopped and turned to face her fully. Listen to me. I do not care if we never set foot in that church again. I do not care if the whole town shuns us. You are worth more than all of them combined, and I will not let them make you feel like you are the problem. But you should not have to give up your community because of me. They are not my community. You are. You and me and whatever family we build together. That is our community. Victoria searched his face, and whatever she saw there made her eyes fill with tears. How are you so sure about us? How can you be so certain when everything is working against us? Because loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done, Randall said simply. Everything else is just noise. They stopped going to town except when absolutely necessary. It was a return to the isolation Randall had known before Victoria, but it felt different now. Instead of empty loneliness, it was chosen privacy. Instead of hiding from connection, they were protecting what they had built together. Summer passed into fall, and as the leaves turned gold and red, Victoria told Randall she was pregnant. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors when she said, I need to tell you something. What is it? I am with child. About 3 months along, I think. Randall felt his heart stop and then restart, racing with joy and terror. A baby. We are going to have a baby. Yes, are you happy? Happy. Victoria, I am terrified and thrilled and I can barely breathe. Yes, I am happy. Are you? She placed a hand on her still flat stomach. I am scared. What if the baby is like me? What if they grow too tall and face all the same struggles? What kind of mother am I to bring a child into this when I know how hard it will be? You will be an amazing mother because you know those struggles. You know how to be strong and brave and how to survive in a world that does not always understand you. And our child will have both of us to protect them and love them no matter what. Randall placed his hand over hers on her stomach. We will face whatever comes together. The pregnancy progressed normally at first, but as Victoria's stomach grew, so did the challenges. Her already large frame made the pregnancy more difficult. By her 7th month, she could barely move without pain. The nearest doctor was in Copper Ridge, and when Randall finally swallowed his pride and rode to town to ask for help, the doctor refused. I am sorry, Mr. Carter, but I cannot treat your wife. I do not have experience with someone of her unusual size, and I would not know how to help if something went wrong during the birth. You would be better off taking her to Billings, where they have a larger hospital. Billings is a 3-day journey. She cannot travel that far in her condition. The doctor shrugged. Then I suggest you find a midwife and pray that nature takes its course without complications. Randall left the doctor's office feeling more helpless than he had since the night his family died. He could not protect Victoria from this. He could not shield her from the reality that her differences meant even basic medical care was denied to her. He found a midwife named Sarah Coleman who lived 10 miles north of his ranch. She was an older woman, weathered and practical, who had delivered hundreds of babies over her 40 years on the frontier. I will help your wife, she said after Randall explained the situation, but I cannot promise anything. If the baby is as large as she is, the birth could be very difficult. You need to prepare yourself for the possibility of complications. Just do what you can, Randall said. Please. As Victoria's due date approached in late February, the weather turned brutal. Blizzards swept across the territory, dumping snow and dropping temperatures to dangerous levels. Randall brought in extra firewood, stockpiled supplies, and tried to prepare for every possibility. Sarah Coleman agreed to stay at the ranch for the final 2 weeks, sleeping in the loft so she would be there when the baby came. The labor started on a night when the wind howled like wolves and snow battered the windows in sheets of white. Victoria's water broke just after midnight, and by dawn she was in the hard grip of contractions that left her gasping and pale. Sarah worked with calm efficiency, but Randall could see the worry in her eyes as the hours stretched on. Victoria was strong, but the baby was indeed large, and the birth was not progressing as it should. "You need to push harder," Sarah said as afternoon faded toward evening. "I am trying," Victoria gasped, her face slick with sweat despite the cold. "The baby is stuck. You need to give me everything you have, or we are going to lose them both." Terror shot through Randall. "What can I do?" "There must be something I can do." "Pray," Sarah said grimly. Randall held Victoria's hand as she pushed with strength born of desperation. She screamed, a sound of pure agony that tore at his heart. He had never felt more helpless in his life. "Almost there," Sarah said. "One more push. Come on, Victoria, one more." Victoria bore down with a final, primal scream, and suddenly there was another sound in the room. The thin, angry wail of a newborn baby. "It is a boy," Sarah said, quickly clearing the infant's airways and wrapping him in a blanket. "He is breathing. He is strong." Randall could barely see through his tears as Sarah placed the baby in Victoria's arms. The child was large, perhaps 10 or 11 pounds, with a thick head of dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. He was perfect. "Our son," Victoria whispered, exhausted and radiant. "We have a son." "What are we going to name him?" Randall asked, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. "Robert," Victoria said, "after my father, Robert Carter." They sat together in the lamplight, the storm raging outside forgotten, as they marveled at the tiny life they had created. Randall had been so afraid of loving again, so convinced that connection would only lead to loss. But looking at his wife and son, he understood that love was not weakness. Love was the only thing that made the harsh frontier bearable. Love was the only thing that made survival worthwhile. Little Robert grew quickly, and it became apparent within his first year that he had inherited his mother's condition. By the time he was 2 years old, he was the size of a normal 4-year-old. By the time he was 5, he stood as tall as many adults. The town continued to give the Carter family a wide berth. Some people whispered about the giant family at the edge of town. Others made the sign against evil when the Carters came to buy supplies. But Randall and Victoria had built something too strong to be shaken by ignorance and fear. They had built a home full of love and laughter. They had built a family. When Robert was 6 years old, a second child came, a daughter they named Sarah after the midwife who had saved Victoria's life. Sarah was also large, though not quite as dramatically as her brother. By the time she was 4, she and Robert played together in the fields around the ranch, two impossibly tall children who knew they were different but also knew they were deeply loved. One spring day when Robert was 9 and Sarah was 3, a traveling family stopped at the ranch asking for directions. They had a daughter about Robert's age, and Randall watched his son's face light up when he saw her. For the first time, Robert met another child who looked him in the eye instead of up. The girl's parents explained that she too had grown unusually tall, and they were traveling west to see if they could find a community more accepting of differences. "There are others," Victoria said quietly after they left, watching Robert wave goodbye to his new friend. "Other families like ours." "Maybe we should find them," Randall said, "build something together. A place where being different is not something to hide." They talked about it over the following months, and eventually put out word through travelers and trading posts. Slowly, other families began to arrive. Some had children who had grown too tall. Others were simply people who had been rejected by traditional communities for various reasons. They built homes near the Carter Ranch, and within 3 years, a small community had formed. They called it Haven Ridge, and it became known throughout Montana Territory as a place where differences were celebrated rather than feared. Where a 7-foot-tall woman could walk through town without stairs, where children of unusual size could play without cruelty, where the outcasts and the different could find acceptance and home. Randall stood on his porch 10 years after Victoria had first stayed, watching the sun set over the small town that had grown around his ranch. Robert was 15 now, tall and strong and confident. Sarah was 9, already taller than most adults but happy and surrounded by friends who saw nothing strange in her height. A third child, Thomas, who was 7 and also tall, played in the yard with other children from the community. Victoria came to stand beside him, her hand finding his automatically. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked. "When you were alone on this ranch, convinced that isolation was safety?" "Never," Randall said honestly. "I thought I would spend my life alone, protecting myself from the pain of loss. I had no idea that the real protection comes from connection, from building something bigger than myself. From love. I used to think being different meant being alone," Victoria said. "That the world had no place for someone like me. I was wrong." "We were both wrong about a lot of things." Randall turned to face her, this woman who had changed everything, who had shown him that the frontier was not just a place of violence and loss, but also of hope and new beginnings. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for taking a chance on a scared, broken cowboy who thought he had nothing left to give." "Thank you for seeing me," Victoria said. "Not the giant woman, just me." They kissed as the sun painted the sky in gold and red, and their children's laughter rang out across the land they had built together. The frontier had tried to make them both believe that survival meant isolation, that differences meant loneliness, that love was too fragile to survive the harsh realities of the West. They had proven it wrong. Despite all odds, despite the cruel whispers and rejection, despite the challenges of her extraordinary height and his crippling fear of loss, Randall Carter and Victoria Norton had built something beautiful. They had created a family, a home, a community where love was stronger than fear and differences were strengths rather than weaknesses. As night fell and stars emerged overhead, Randall called his children inside for dinner. The house they had built together, the home they had filled with love, glowed warm and welcoming in the gathering darkness. It was not the life Randall had imagined for himself all those years ago when he fled Kansas, convinced that isolation was the only way to survive. It was infinitely better. And as he sat down to dinner with his wife and children, surrounded by the sound of their voices and laughter, Randall Carter understood the truth he had spent so long running from. Love was the greatest risk the frontier could offer, but it was also the greatest reward. Not despite the odds, but because of them, he had found everything he thought he had lost forever. He had found home.